Courtesy of GHJ Media Clips, here are our annual Crystal Ball predictions for the entertainment business, recorded December 2022 with Ilan Haimoff, GHJ partner and Profit Participation Services practice leader. Here we go.
Welcome back to another episode of our movie business podcast series with our focus on the new normal in the film and television industry. My name is Ilan Haimoff, and I'm a partner and the department head of the Profit Participation Group at GHJ. I am honored to welcome Jason Squire, Professor Emeritus at USC School of Cinematic Arts, as well as the editor of the Movie Business Book in its 4th edition, to join me in sharing, as we always do every year, our predictions for the coming year for 2023. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you, Ilan. It's great to be with you again. The crystal ball is bright and shiny because there's so much going on. The business has been through a lot. 2020 was a year of crisis. 2021, a year of disruption. 2022, a year of transition. 2023 will be a year of reckoning across the board, requiring resilience in this ongoing recovery. So we can go into 7 categories together, looking back through the crystal ball: management, talent, production, distribution, exhibition, streaming, and other media. So here are some management beats. At Disney, Bob Iger returned as CEO, and this creates a whole new hopeful direction for the future of Disney. It's very, very bright, and most outside the industry are interested in following Disney's progression. But however, for all the studios, content costs remains a big hurdle. Disney will be spending $33 billion on all content in 2023, mostly on streaming. Warner Brothers Discovery will spend $27 billion on all content, including streaming and sports. Netflix will spend $19 billion on streaming content. Amazon, $14 billion. So looking forward, the costs are unsustainable and they'll be going down. Next, everyone will continue cutting personnel. Warner Brothers Discovery, Paramount, Disney, but not as bad, however serious, not as bad as Meta or Twitter. Warner Brothers Discovery at last decided on new rulers of Warner's DC universe. Writer-director James Gunn of Guardians of the Galaxy and Peacemaker, working alongside producer Peter Safran from the Conjuring franchise and also Peacemaker. So this is a very good sign for the DC universe with seasoned creators at the helm. Ilan?
That's actually a great summary and quite in depth. All I really wanted to add, I think the media companies across the board have suffered, if you look at the Wall Street results for the year, and really, to me, it's a sign or a signal that Wall Street wants to see the bottom line improve. What that really means, if you really think about the bottom line, it's give me more revenue, give me less costs. And I think that you've said that already. I mean, I think that unfortunately, many of these media companies facing these headwinds, whether it's inflation, whether it's continued pressure from competition, and many, many other factors, we're reaching a point where there's going to have to be cost cutting, unfortunately, whether it's with personnel, whether it's with reduced budgets in connection with content, whether it's being a little bit more thoughtful with respect to spending, whatever it may relate to. And I think that's really that these headwinds are unfortunately finally are here, and these media companies will have to deal with it, from most likely cost cutting in 2023.
Yes. And this also brings to mind the question of studios merging. Studios possibly merging with tech, like Amazon having bought MGM. The rumor of Netflix buying Paramount. Apple buying Netflix. Disney merging with Apple. Bob Iger says no. And Lionsgate, which is always for sale. In the streaming arena, merging or bundling. Starz, AMC, Showtime, if it's spun off from CBS. Is Netflix for sale in general? Will Comcast buy Netflix? and Peacock, which needs more content. Will Comcast buy Hulu? So this is all in the mix of rumors swirling. Ilan, what's your take on consolidation?
I would say two things. One, the federal government is looking at these possibilities and they're signaling probably not. It's going to be very difficult to see significant consolidations in the current environment, the regulatory environment specifically. However, where there, again, these are all predictions, but where I see the possibility of consolidation may be in the area of streaming specifically, because there's so much pressure due to the significant competition, especially here in the United States, fighting for subscribers. And that is an area that potentially may see some consolidation because it's simply not sustainable having so many different competitors with very little net profits, if at all. I mean, I think many of them are losing. So they may be looking at joint ventures. They may be looking at perhaps looking at bundling different of these services that are available and so on.
Yeah. Well, continuing finally under management, there have been 3 historic changes with repercussions in 2023. First, Amazon's $8.5 billion merger with MGM was completed. Now, this is not the golden age MGM, which is owned by Turner and Warner's Discovery, but only the post-1986 MGM library, plus the coveted United Artists library. This places Amazon in a much stronger position than before, greatly expanding their content. And at the start of 2023, Epix Cable is rebranded as MGM Plus. Second, Discovery's $43 billion merger with Warner Media moved AT&T out of the movie business last year, and good riddance to them. David Zaslav, at the helm of Warner Brothers Discovery, pledged to find some $3 billion in downsizing. And this has personnel on edge, a real chilling effect with announcements almost every week. And it's just going to get worse. An example from last year is that Warner Brothers shelved a $90 million costing movie, Batgirl, that was scheduled to be on HBO Max. This is part of the cost cutting and write-offs that Warner's is doing to reach the $3 billion in cost savings due to high debt, and the big layoffs will continue. Third, talent agency CAA's purchase of ICM moves us over to talent. The Department of Justice approved this purchase, CAA buying ICM for $750 million, further consolidating the talent agency business. Over 400 ICM agents joined the CAA structure, and there's a clash of cultures. ICM is known for individual representation of clients. The CAA culture calls for collective representation, a team of agents per client. And this leaves only 3 big agencies, the combined CAA, WME, William Morris Endeavor, and UTA, United Talent. Meanwhile, deal makers will continue to invent new strategies for the back end of talent agreements to make up for the loss of back end when movies are released day and date, defined as theatrical at the same time as streaming, or close to, instead of exclusively in theaters. This introduced the concept of pre-negotiated buyouts to talent streaming deals, a lump sum paid in advance to talent who would have otherwise gambled on back-end points if the movie had opened in theaters and was successful. But this bonus acts as if every movie is profitable, which is not the case. So this needs to be redefined for each talent. UTA CEO and founder Jeremy Zimmer wrote this following quotation in the Hollywood Reporter, quote, "For the creative community, what's needed boils down to accurately measuring how well an individual show or film is doing against others, and an increased level of compensation for those creating outside value." Ilan?
Look, I think the most important point that you brought up that I want to emphasize, it's time for revisiting how the talent is compensated. There's a lot of talk in the community, in the industry right now about whether there's a need, and I think you mentioned obviously one example, But there's others. There's a lot of talk right now about revisiting how you compensate for success. In a way, it's bringing back the conversation around profit, the traditional profit participation model, where you give the participant, and the participant could be anybody from an investor to the actor to the director and so on to the producer, to get some calculation of success, which is something that we need to be discussing in the community, how success is defined, particularly for streaming. But whatever that success model is, it should be in a way that compensates ultimately those who created this incredible content that became so successful. The idea of throwing money at the beginning, whether it's fixed comp at the beginning or throughout the project, it's not as motivating. There's no way to say it other than to tell you that the talent would be stakeholders no different than the streaming service, and all really should be involved in making the content as competitive as possible to get as much attention from the consumer as possible. But ultimately, if it does become a success, everybody should have a fair share of the net profits of the show or of the film.
Absolutely. And regarding compensation, here's a fun fact. In upfront fees for directors with a solid track record, streamers are paying from $4 million to $7 million, while studios are paying $2.5 million to $5 million. For Amazon's upcoming Red Shirt, star Channing Tatum gets $25 million, director David Leitch, $18 million, and writer Simon Kinberg, $8 million. Whew. So let's turn now to production. COVID protocols in production will remain as productions protect all personnel. These protocols add some 15 to 20% to the budget, fewer people gathering, the use of pods, streamlining post-production. And these were all first adopted by the industry back in September 2020. On the set, protocols for firearms or other dangers will be much more strict in the aftermath of the tragic unintentional killing of the DP on the set of Alec Baldwin's Rust. And unions, WGA contract with management, that's the AMPTP, the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, expires in May 2023. Negotiations will be underway, and there's the potential for a writer's strike, which would be the first since 2007. Ilan?
Let me tie in a couple of items I've brought up before. The headwinds we've discussed, the overall economy, the inflation, is not only impacting the distributor or the production company or the streaming service, but it's also impacting the talent, the people that create. And certainly there is significant pressure individually on families across this industry, which perhaps is contributing to that potential strike. I think that's one thing I was going to add. However, and most importantly, the prediction here in terms of cost cutting also will impact production. Production may begin to cool. Perhaps there will be smaller budgets available. There may be more scrutiny toward what is being produced. Throughout the production, there may be a lot more scrutiny in terms of overages. And as individuals with decision making of ordering shows and motion pictures, there's going to be a lot more scrutiny again in being selective, in making sure that the ultimate value is carefully analyzed every time there's a funding that's going to be attributed to that particular project. Mm-hmm. So more scrutiny, less production, and perhaps, as you already mentioned, more potential conflict between the talent and let's call him the production and distribution arm of our industry, because of the overall economy impacting individuals, not just companies.
Very good. And this brings us to distribution. A 45-day theatrical window is taking hold, but streamers keep experimenting with day and date. Glass Onion is a really good example. Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery from Netflix. It recently played a respectable week-long theatrical run they called an extended preview in some 600 of the best theaters before a 3-week blackout period and then on Netflix, December 23rd. However, Netflix left serious money on the table by limiting the one-week run. This kind of experiment might help settle the tension between streamers and theater owners. The streamers don't seem to care that day and date is not as profitable or as popular theatrical exclusives. So they'll continue this hybrid business model to placate exhibitors and continue testing. Another example, in October, Universal's Halloween Ends opened day and date on Peacock to a box office gross of $41 million, a strong number, lower than if it were exclusively in theaters, reduced by the streaming audience that stayed at home. So it would have been even more successful at the box office. However, from Peacock's point of view, it was the platform's most popular two-day premiere in its brief history. So they were happy. And we can't leave distribution without mentioning the continual impact of China. It remains a big issue. The government will continue to select only 34 overseas movies to be released and when they will be released, keeping long holiday periods for local language movies. Avatar opened in China, but they still won't release recent Marvel movies, including Wakanda Forever. Ilan?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things I wanted to bring up, which tie into what you've already mentioned. Glass Onion being one. Reed Hastings, over at Netflix, mentioned that historically, the theatrical window, which would be fairly limited historically with Netflix, will continue to be a way of promoting ultimately somebody watching the film on the Netflix service. But I think what Glass Onion is telling everybody is the streamers may not take the full benefit of that theatrical window, and I believe more streamers are going to take advantage of that theatrical window and perhaps extend it beyond the 1 week. Ultimately, it ties back into the Wall Street pressure that I mentioned earlier, ensuring that there is a bottom line that is in the black. And to do that, you need to maximize revenue. And therefore, it means perhaps being more thoughtful with respect to windowing, especially the theatrical window, but perhaps even more. Maybe there is a way for the streaming service to ultimately look to license the product at some point, and again, maximize revenue. It's all about maximizing revenue and reducing costs in 2023. So there could be some more of that exploration of streaming services in trying to get more revenue from other windows that perhaps they haven't in the past. The other thing that is still unclear is the overall distribution window of motion pictures is still in a state of flux. I think you've already mentioned experimentation, but the question that comes to mind is, will there be much, if anything, in terms of television distribution overall in cable and downstream, with library sales to free television and so on? What will happen with the hard goods of, where we were, historically have relied on coming in? Will that go away and so on? So there's a lot of unclear ultimate windowing into the future, and perhaps we're going to see even more change in the coming year and beyond.
Well, that sounds right. That's why it's such a fascinating time to be following all of these issues. As you say, the streamers are shifting from focusing on subscriber numbers, which had been their mantra ever since, to use your phrase, to maximizing overall revenue, and why they've added, ad-supported tiers to their customer choices, which we'll cover in a moment when we get to streaming. But let's turn to exhibition. And this is some unhappy thoughts. The theaters will continue to decline and suffer. The second largest global exhibitor, Cineworld, including Regal, filed for bankruptcy. Many small theaters have not survived COVID. The estimates of losing 1,000 domestic screens since the start of the pandemic. AMC and Regal chains introduced surge ticket pricing, charging $1 or more added on for the most popular showtimes. Surge pricing has been used overseas for years. As an example of pricing, AMC Century City in Los Angeles is pricing Avatar: The Way of Water at $28.50 for 3D, $26.50 for IMAX, and $20 for standard showings. And after the streaming habit took hold during the pandemic, customers are not in a rush back to theaters, except for tentpole movies and those with Oscar buzz. This is the new normal. Barring any COVID resurgence, 2023 box office will be strong, but below 2019 levels. The hope is that 2024 is the year of full recovery. And finally, many art house movies will continue to pivot to streaming, where there are hardly any marketing costs. And that, of course, is a very important factor for any distributor. Ilan?
So here's where perhaps I have a different view. I am certainly bullish when it comes to the theatrical window. I think COVID was certainly an terrible period for companies like AMC and others, as you've mentioned. And as we look back, they generally have survived. I mean, I know that it was a very difficult period. The last time it happened was 100 years ago, but here we go again. It's the 100-year flood. But it came and it left, and they're still standing. And what I think is important is to recognize that theatrical window is here to stay. The question is, does it apply to every film? And I think that's really where there may be some changes in the future, where perhaps some films may go straight to streaming, others will go through a theatrical window. It just depends. There's just going to be a lot more variety of ways of distributing films, but there are going to be those films that will have a theatrical window, particularly the really big ones. Avatar, as we are recording this, is going into theaters all over the United States this weekend. And many others, if you go back in time and forward in terms of planning, I think this is just here to stay, at least into the foreseeable future. But more importantly, I think that it is something that is critical to the ultimate revenues that the studios and perhaps others depend on in order for them to recover their costs of production and hopefully make some money on top of it.
Right. Well, as a movie theater goer from way back, I'm just suggesting the decline, which is very sad, and the loss of independent screens, and not expected to build up a whole lot of new screens in the future. So this is very serious for this area of the industry, considering all the changes.
You're right.
Yes, I'm with you. Theatrical forever. Journalists every 5 to 10 years predict the death of movie-going in theaters, but they've been doing this for decades, and there's no truth to it. This has been a very tough period, and I'm with you. We want the theatrical window to be wide open. So let's segue to streaming. To boost revenue, Netflix and Disney added an ad-supported tier at $7 a month versus $10 with no ads, and they also are including paid password sharing. So this will be more revenue. This has been an issue for Netflix for quite a while, all the free sharing of passwords, but that's stopping. Disney charges $8 a month with ads versus $11 with no ads. So this is the new trend. Another fun fact, streaming is the most used TV viewing system based on recent surveys. But here's the thing, streamers do not share useful data. They only chart hours watched per movie, leaving representatives, talent, and viewers in the dark, unlike reported box office or Nielsen TV ratings. So it's hard to value a hit or a miss. This lack of transparency is deliberate. With more success, industry players will demand a basis for charting success, as quoted earlier by Jeremy Zimmer of UTA. The market cares more about profitability than subscriber numbers. And after Netflix lost over 200,000 subscribers in the first quarter last year, rattling the markets, everybody saying the streaming party's over, it bounced back by gaining 2.4 million in the third quarter last year. So it's back on track, but still vulnerable as the only standalone streamer with no parent company with deep pockets. And that's why it's a candidate for sale. But to counter all this, the Ankler quotes from the Netflix annual report. Quote, and this is Netflix speaking, "Our competitors are investing heavily to drive subscribers and engagement, but building a large, successful streaming business is hard. We estimate they are all losing money with combined 2022 operating losses at well over $1 billion versus Netflix $5 to $6 billion annual operating profits." So yes, it'll be a year of reckoning for streamers with high content costs that are simply unsustainable. And finally, my favorite streamer observation, Ilan, you can't fast forward in a movie theater.
Yes, that is absolutely true.
So you wanted to add some comments about streaming?
Yeah, so let me, thank you. So let me just share a couple of thoughts with respect to where we think we're headed. The world of streaming is maturing very quickly. And I don't know about you, Jason, but it feels as if every one of these streaming services is becoming just like another digital cable channel, especially as they welcome advertising. And I think that feels more like a sophisticated cable channel. Where I think we need to think about as we look at next year, there is a crowded space here of many, many different services competing with one another for subscriber commitment. I mean, if you really think about that word, commitment. However, I think where we perhaps will see a shift toward is subscriber churn. Subscriber will be gravitating to a particular show, watch the show, and then cancel and go back perhaps when the next season comes up or if another show pops up. So there's going to be a lot of churn, which is going to drive all of us crazy in terms of how do you predict the streaming revenue when you've got unpredictable subscribers coming in and going out. And that perhaps will challenge the idea of binge watching, because some services don't provide binge watching. You have to tune in once a week just to see the next episode of a particular show. So there's just a lot of these potentials of A, will binge watching stay on? B, how will the advertising revenue coming in will impact some of these services? And C, what will happen with the subscriber behavior? Will they stay on? Will they leave? And all of that coupled with again, as I mentioned earlier, we've got a common theme here with these headwinds coming in with respect to the economy slowing down and Wall Street at the same time putting pressure on making net profits. And to do that, many of these streaming services are going to start having to look at licensing to third parties, shows and programs they have on their streaming service. And I think you hear that already from Warner Brothers Discovery, for example. I think that more and more of that will be considered. And finally, as I mentioned earlier on our podcast, watch out. There may be some consolidation or at least collaboration between different services on joint ventures in certain territories and ways of collaborating in order for them to sustain the revenue streams. One of them, for example, is the collaboration between Walmart Plus and Paramount Plus. And
right.
And that could just be more of that coming up in order for these services to continue to sustain themselves.
Well, that's true. And I'm so glad that you emphasized how vulnerable streaming is due to churning. I mean, especially Netflix. So in other media, the Federal Trade Commission is trying to block Microsoft's $69 billion purchase of Activision Blizzard, makers of Call of Duty and Warcraft. Meta will have more problems with its VR social network Horizon Worlds, They spent $12 billion so far, and this is misguided. The user needs a $400 Quest headset. The newest headset costs $1,500, the Meta Quest Pro. These headsets bring you into Horizon Worlds, Meta's virtual theme park. It was reviewed by the New York Times as buggy and unpopular. Meta put it in a quality lockdown to work to improve it. And let's remember that back in November, Meta laid off 11,000 workers. It's a huge downsize. Next, deep fake technology will advance. It's popular on TikTok. It can create images resembling real people and situations, including politicians and actors like Tom Cruise. Consider its use in movies, games, or attack ads. And finally, turning to esports and sports gambling, the battle for more states allowing sports betting will increase as state lawmakers and gambling lobbyists continue their dance. New York voters approved it. California voted against it. The industry is now offering colleges millions of dollars to promote gambling on campus. And the major players here are Caesars Sportsbook, DraftKings, and FanDuel. But what about music, Ilan?
Yeah, so music is an area that has grown over the last several years, and I say the word grown, it's really in valuation in particular, which triggered quite a bit of transactions. So that may be reaching a point of cooling again with the overall economy, but also perhaps overvaluation at this point, which calls into question whether others are going to want to continue to acquire content. So I think there's going to be some perhaps period of cooling and recalibration as opposed to this significant period of billions and billions of dollars were thrown into this area, but perhaps that's reaching a point of cooling.
And I think finally, all of this proves that the entertainment industry, especially in this period of time, continues to be fascinating to track.
Indeed. Jason, I think this is I believe the last topic we're going to cover. It's been actually a lot of fun doing these predictions with you.
Yeah, thank you.
And I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate everybody tuning in and listening in to our predictions. There's no guarantees any of our predictions will come true, but we'll see what happens a year from now.
Yes. Thanks again, Ilan.
You're welcome.